That's, yes, that's right. Thanks. And so I'll just introduce myself first and then we'll get into it. Um, and so I'm a death doula, although I'm not all that into the whole death doula work, but the training was excellent. And I actually trained as a death doula to learn about the burial rules in BC because I do have a desire to establish our own natural burial ground in the Caribou. Um, that's still a dream, but it hasn't died. So there's nothing really to report there, but that is my passion. My husband and I live on 48 acres off-grid and remote on the Chilcotin Plateau, west of Williams Lake, sort of in the interior of BC. And so it's quite a remote life. And it often feels, and for many of us, I think, feels like a bit of a vacuum we're working in when we're in the death care work and we're in natural burial. Then when I get together with a group like this, I'm reminded of the fact that we really have a strong community of people who are wanting this to come to fruition, natural burial. Um, and I'd like to see it available for every community in British Columbia. That is my dream and my goal. I'd love to see the kind of cemetery that Cathy Valentine has established, and she's going to be doing our presentation tonight. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But that's certainly that's an ideal, is the natural burial cemetery that they have on Salt Spring now. And so, we have, I started off, this is the fourth session that I've organized on natural burial in British Columbia and began calling it Beyond Hope. And there's a reason that I call it Beyond Hope. And I'll just share my screen here for a second and talk about why I call it Beyond Hope. Here is a map that I've got on Google that's easy to access for anyone. But these are our natural and green burial options in British Columbia. This does not include Indigenous cemeteries and graveyards. They are governed by their own rules and they can often accomplish a natural burial in an Indigenous cemetery. For most of us, this is what's available. So when I say Beyond Hope, you'll see that most of our burial, natural burial, green burial options are down at the bottom here, right? And the rest of British Columbia, there's a huge part of British Columbia where we just don't have anything available. When I die, I'd love to have a natural burial. And yes, it would be awesome to be buried on Salt Spring or at Heritage Garden Cemetery. But I want something close to home. And at the moment, there's nothing close to home other than these ones here. Like this is Prince George, and it's a municipal cemetery, and they have a green burial area. So we talk about green burial and we talk about natural burial. A natural burial is really the ideal, where it's a complete natural burial cemetery. Uh, there's quite a few municipal green burial sections in municipal cemeteries that, they're it's what Ed Bixby calls a low-hanging fruit. The green burial and we really need to encourage that because it's a first step. And so if your municipal cemetery doesn't offer green burial yet, it's really good idea to talk to your city, talk to your cemetery people, find out if they're thinking about it, if it might be an option. And, if they don't understand what green burial is, you say, well, I want my body to be in contact with the earth. Even if they still insist on a grave liner, kind of called a buttered dish, where there's a liner that comes down and covers the top and the sides, but it doesn't cover the bottom. And so your body could be in contact with the earth, and you might still be able to accomplish a semi-natural burial. At least your body would naturally decompose. So those are the kind of options in municipal cemeteries that I think it's important that we push for those, as well as starting our own natural burial grounds. And so Denman Island. So I don't know. I won't go through the list here, but you can access this map online. It's linked on my website as well on greenburialbc.ca. But this and also if you know of any, let me know because I love to pop a new one on the map. um, so that's kind of my introduction. I I'm really pleased to have Madeline Christie here with us tonight. She's kind of my right hand, not kind of, she's my right hand tonight, looking after the chat. Please feel free to pop questions and notes in the chat. Actually, what I'd love you to do is if you could put in the chat right now what community you belong to, and maybe just let me know if there's just a yes or a no, if there's a natural burial option connected to your community that you know of. That would be great. Um, and Madeline is here to help us out tonight. She's going to be keeping an eye on the chat and helping me out when I mess things up technically. Hopefully we won't. Hopefully she'll have a nice boring evening and be able to watch Cathy and enjoy that. So we'll have a Kelowna, not yet, Gus. Comox, Maple Ridge, in 30 minutes to an hour. Creston, I don't think so. So that's really good to know. It's good to know that you don't know, because I'm going to ask you to find out. I really want to encourage people to contact their city halls, their cemetery people, and just ask, because we can't move this forward unless we ask and ask and ask. And it's got to be us. It's got to be the general public, um, with funeral professionals, people who want natural burial, funeral directors will not have nearly as much sway as just us, just the public, right? Asking for green burial, natural burial, asking and asking again, get your friends to ask. It's not a really difficult thing to do. It's kind of it's a pre-need question. And actually on my website, there is a page that says, what can I do? And it kind of lays out how to have that conversation if you're not sure how to have that conversation with your city, municipality, regional district, whatever it might be. Yeah, so thank you for that. And we have Cathy Valentine with us here tonight. I'm just thrilled that she's here, and I know that all of you are as well. She has offered to lead us through a bit of an idea of what a natural burial or natural burials look like on Salt Spring, at the Salt Spring Natural Cemetery. Salt Spring Island Natural Cemetery opened in the fall of 2020. And when I first heard about it, I actually shook. I was so delighted and amazed that somebody had actually done this. So anyway, since then, 72 people have been buried or scattered there. More than 120 people have arranged for their future burials. And they only opened in 2020. Cathy Valentine and her partner Gavin Johnston established the natural cemetery on a part of the land that they live on and farm. This forested hillside could have been logged or subdivided or developed for almost any use. By creating their natural cemetery, the forest is now protected and conserved in perpetuity. Cathy and Gavin are committed to biodiversity on the land and to offering meaningful and natural burials for the community. Of course, one of the really wonderful things about Salt Spring is that it's available to anyone. I can be buried there. You could be, if you lived in Nova Scotia, you could be buried there. I mean, it's a long way to transport somebody, but it is possible because it is an open natural burial cemetery, unlike Denman Island, which is limited to folks who have lived there or do live there now. Um, so I'm going to turn this over to Cathy. We will have her presentation and we will have some time post-presentation for some open discussion, what folks are doing in and around BC, if anyone has anything to report or questions. And what else? I think that's, if you need to take a break or look after yourself, do that, please, of course. It's lovely to have everybody on screen. If you want to go off screen, feel free to do that too, of course. And I think we will turn it over to Cathy if you're ready to go.
Thank you, Nicola. I just want to segue before I get into my prepared stuff. About the Salt Spring Island Natural Cemetery being open to the public, open to everyone. And what the Salt Spring Island Natural Cemetery is a conservation natural cemetery. So Nicola talked about green burial and natural burial. And then conservation burial is where you've used the cemetery designation to conserve, to protect a piece of land. And so that's what we've done. And so we're not trying to maximize the graves. We're not trying to do grave reuse or double the triple depth. And we're not, and out of the 14 acres, we're only burying in about 2 of the acres because it was a way to protect the land. And so when this land is full, then hopefully there'll be other land that we can designate a cemetery, and it can go on and on like that. So the conservation green burial movement is really very cool. And I encourage you to learn about those distinctions because it is a different thing. And like Nicola said, it is something to have to be directly into the earth. And if that's your wish, how to make that happen. And then it goes all the way to, the protecting land and restoring land or protecting standing forests. So it is a really exciting movement. I'm also very excited and passionate about it. So my prepared speech says to thank you all for coming. I am glad to see you, and I'm glad for your enthusiasm for natural burial. I want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Coetsin and the Wasanich people, and how grateful I am for this beautiful and rich land. I'm very grateful for it, to be here and have a life here. So I'm going to take you through a slideshow in a couple minutes of the natural burial process. Some of this will be practical steps. Some of this will be sacred, but all of it, I want to make clear, all of it is a ceremony. And what ceremony is or isn't in this process, I really see it all as ceremony, from the most practical steps to the most profound or the most spiritual. It all really is a ceremony. So at the Salt Spring Islands Natural Cemetery, we have hosted, like Nicola said, more than 70 burials here. And there is no right or wrong with a funeral. We can call it as well as a funeral. There's no right or wrong. I spoke to a minister recently, and he said to me he'd much rather lead funerals than weddings because funerals are allowed to be imperfect. So we have buried here people with no one in attendance except for myself and the funeral directors. We have, and those have been ceremonies, and we have had ceremonies and buried people here where there's been 2 people in attendance and then up to 80 people in attendance. We have buried people here with Christian ministers, priests, with rabbis, senseis, Indigenous elders, friends, families, and others. All of it, everything is welcome. And every one of these burials, like I said, has been a ceremony, has been a ritual. Every burial involves opening the earth, bringing the deceased, and in bringing the deceased, you're not just bringing the body, you're bringing that person's life to the cemetery. You're placing that person into the earth. So you're giving that person back to the earth. And then you're covering them with the earth. You're putting them back in the earth. And the hardest part is then you're walking away. So this is an ancient ritual, right? It's a simple and it's a very profound act. So 2 things, businessy logistics, before I begin with the slideshow is one is, I think what Nicola and I thought is that any questions, sort of brief, really relevant questions are welcome as we go through the slideshow. Larger questions and more discussion like questions or questions that aren't immediately relevant to the slide or to what I'm saying could go in the chat and could be talked about afterwards. That would be great. And then secondly, it's about the photo use. So this video is being recorded and I think people will watch it again or watch it later. And so these photos, I have been given the okay to use them, but you all haven't been. Okay, so so please don't reproduce them or use them again for your own uses or anything public. Okay, for privacy. Thank you. Okay, that's where I was going to say those things. This is a photo of Gavin and I and Cowboy. That's my dog. And this is just a placeholder to demonstrate to you and to have the conversation about meeting with family and friends. So that is always what happens. This is the start of the ceremony, really. Is maybe I've met with the people before, maybe they've pre-planned, and so I'm prepared that they're going to be coming here, and maybe they haven't. Maybe their loved one has died and suddenly they're in this situation where they need to do something with their loved one, right? You hadn't thought about this, maybe it's unexpected, or you just hadn't thought about it. And so I get a call that someone's partner or mother or father or child has died, and could they bring them to the natural cemetery? So ideally we meet in person. And that begins the process. That's all done, with compassion and sensitivity, and it's a challenge for sure. So this partly I hope to educate some of you if you're not aware of all of these things in practicalities. And one of the practicalities is when there's been a death, there's someone that's called the authorized decision maker, and that it goes in an order, it's in the Cremation, Interment, and Funeral Services Act, and it goes in the order spouse, I don't know the order off by heart, spouse, and then maybe child, and then parent. So that person, the closest sort of next of kin, that person is who has to do a couple things. They have to sign a couple documents, and they have to agree that this person can be buried in that place, in the cemetery. Other than that, my point in saying this is other than that, other people can be the front people to talk to the people like me. And that really helps someone that's going through that intense grief time, is to have friends or family, or have a sister or have a close friend or an aunt or a niece that will stand up for you and really be your advocate and be the front person. So we all, I'm sure, will have opportunities to do that for people as we grow older. And I encourage you to, even if the person says, no, I can handle it, just be like, please let me do this for you. And it's an important job, and it's a really, really valuable job. So then I can talk with that person and we can organize a lot of stuff. And then the main decision maker can just say yes or no, or, really helps to spread it out. And in addition to that one main person, of course, it's also wonderful to have a circle of support. So to have a circle of support emotionally and also practically in this acute time, right? Between the time of a death or leading up to a death, and then until there's been a burial. I mean, on and on, but this is when a lot of the decisions and that they have to do with what I was speaking about tonight about the burial ceremony. And that main organizer is not necessarily the celebrant or the person that would lead the ceremony. That's not necessarily the same person. And those people don't necessarily have the most important traits. So the person that leads the ceremony, you can see, right, that might be a good leader with a good spoken voice who's kind of poetic and maybe a bit spiritual. Whereas the person that organizes things is going to be really organized, is going to be clear thinking, is going to be a good communicator, through emails and all of that. So just thinking about that, right? It takes a village. So a few decisions that are made ahead of time by the family and friends is where, I mean, in the natural cemetery and in our case, we try to give families a couple choices, 2 or 3 choices between graves. We don't pre-organize graves because we fill graves out like you're painting yourself out of a room. We fill them sequentially, and we fill them based on the land and the plants that are growing there. So, yet we still do try to give a couple options because people like options, and it does seem to be nice for people. So which grave, and then is your loved one going to be shrouded or in some sort of a casket? What kind of ceremony is it going to be? How many people are going to be coming? And what the needs might be. I'm not a funeral director, so I don't actually organize catering and all of that, but we host it. And so some of those questions are relevant at the cemetery for us. Okay. So this is a photo of grave preparation. So Gavin is on the left, and we mark out where the grave is going to be, and he's just showing that. We put the boards down, and I will get into this more with more pictures, but we most often we have a small backhoe, or sorry, a small excavator, mini excavator that he digs the grave with. And sometimes it is dug by hand. And I will get to that a bit in the next slide, I think, but this is just a picture of kind of before and after. So on the right, obviously, is a dug grave, and it's also decorated, which I'll get to too. Okay, so here we have the hand dug by the family's grave, and then we have that's this is a picture of the backhoe that's like ours, but that's not my house or anything. Okay, so there's a lot of pros and cons to hand digging and to machine digging. And it's not like, oh, hand digging is just better or machine digging is just better. There really are pros and cons. And one thing, whether it's machine dug, a grave is machine dug or hand dug, is it seems like it's actually a skill to dig a grave. That's what I want to say. It's like, oh yeah, I've dug holes. Oh yeah, I'm a gardener. I can dig holes. I've dug ditches. It's a different thing to dig a grave. And that's why I think, all through history, there's been grave diggers, because it's a certain skill. It's a certain, you just stick with it and stick with it. But you have to have, you want to have the sides really sharp and straight. You want to have it pretty square. And you have to do all of that with a minimum disturbance to the land, whether it's a conventional cemetery or a natural cemetery. I don't think anyone wants to disturb the land much. And you want to separate your soils. You want to put your debris in one pile, your topsoil in one pile, all your subsoil in another pile. So it's a bit of an art. It's a skill, let's say. And when families come, I mean, I'm there, and I try to manage, but it can also be a bit of Nicholas said try not to swear, but it can be a shit show, okay? Just because it gets wild, and everyone's upset, but it's also great because it's cathartic. So they're moving their grief, and they're working hard, and they're sweating, and they're doing it all together. So it's also quite exciting. Now, the reality that I've learned is that most people, once they die, are quite elderly. Not everyone, but most people are. And by that point, you don't have a group of family and friends who are young and strong enough to dig your grave for you. So most people are quite fine with this little excavator that we have. And it's low energy, it's low work. Inevitably, Gavin gets out and hand digs some of the grave and gets out rocks and all of that. So we feel okay about it. And we don't have the human power for all that hand digging. Now what works really well is when families want to fill in the grave. And that's what we are really strong supporters of. If there's people that are willing to do that, or even fill it in half full or anything like that. That's really quite beautiful, and that often happens spontaneously. And I will talk more about that too. Just interrupt me if there's any questions, okay? Because I'm not looking at the chat. Okay, so this is a bit more beautiful, isn't it? These are two graves. I really, really love to get in there and decorate the graves. And of course, summertime when there's local flowers is really wonderful. And we don't provide flowers, but we provide all the greenery. I go down the trails in the cemetery and elsewhere, and I just trim back what's impinging on the trails anyways. And then I use those sword ferns or cedar boughs, and I use those to line the grave, to make a bed in the grave, and also to make a frame around the outside of the grave. It's quite nice. Um, Most people, I mean, it's beginning to change here on Salt Spring after 70 burials, but most people still haven't been to a burial, and certainly not a natural burial before. So to see the soil just raw can be quite, it can be quite raw and a little shocking. I think that the greenery really softens it, and the flowers certainly really make it pretty and more uplifting. We put the boards alongside the graves on the right side, you see that, so that when we bring the deceased, you can walk along the boards and then the side walls don't cave in. So that's practical, but it also looks quite nice. On the left, it doesn't have that. And then, but the boards on the left, crosswise across the grave, what we often do, not every time, and I also wanted to qualify that I'm there's not any, like I said, there's no right and wrong. So sometimes we do it like this, sometimes like this, sometimes like this. So I'll say different things. It's not that I'm contradicting myself, it's that we really do different things depending on the scenario and the wishes of the family and what the landscape calls for. So actually, I remember now that grave on the left, it's tilted upwards. So these boards didn't work. They would be less stable. So that's why we didn't put the boards on the picture on the left. And you can kind of see that. You can see that it's wonky. So the boards are across because what we often do is bring the deceased up in a tray, it's shrouded and then in a tray, which I'll show you. And then when we get graveside, the pallbearers will put the body on those boards. So there's a moment, or there's more than a moment, there's a few minutes where the person's hovering above the grave on those boards. And that lets everybody who's been processing to come up and to gather around, and then some words to be spoken, to have a graveside service before the interment, before they're lowered down, right? Once they're lowered down, that's the interment. So they're into terra, they're in the earth. And it's good to take each of these steps, step by step, and go nice and slow, pausing for people to process, to let it sink in what's happening. You know, in that, I mean, probably many of you have had this experience of a death, and then being in that acute grief time, it's kind of like everything slows down, and yet everything slows down internally, and yet the world feels so fast. That's what I feel like. I've slowed right down, but the world is spinning by me. And so it's hard to process. It's hard to communicate. It's hard to understand. It's hard to get in through your senses and to process mentally. So I really encourage people with the ceremonies to just go as slow as they like, to let every step really sink in, and so they can be present to it. It can be harder to be present to the moment in that acute grief, right? We're in denial, or we're a little bit checked out, right? Okay.
Kathy, oh, are
Mm-hmm.
you gonna say it, Nicola?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there's just a question from Robert in the chat, and he said, so as nature would have it, some graves are dug into very unlevel land, meaning one end may be more shallow than the other, or is the bottom of the grave also dug unlevel with the surface?
Like to
Yeah,
match
that's
the
great.
surface. Yeah, sorry. I could have hit the hand thing. I didn't know
That's okay.
if you're sort of catching questions in the chat or if you'd prefer us to just put up the hand and drop the question over the mic.
I prefer that Maddie just interrupts like she just did. That was great.
Okay. Okay. Duly noted.
Yeah. Yeah, we have an ongoing debate about that. This is actually where Gavin would be a better person to answer the question because I went, so that grave on the left, I don't know, you can tell it's on an incline. And that's what I thought, that it could be on the same incline as the top. But, and then I understand what he says, well, then the person would be like, woo, like going downhill. And when we put them in the ground, then they'll sort of slump towards their feet. So, and I get that. He really has a sense he wants them when they're buried to be laying flat, level, like level. Um, but then that does mean that the head has to be deeper than the feet. And we bury everybody here. It's a slope, it is a hillside. So we bury everyone with heads uphill. Rather than downhill, right? That just feels wrong. There's one little graveyard where people will be hill crosswise in the hill. So yeah, it's a good question, Robert. And it is that he tries to make the bottom of the graves flat. Yes. Mhm. I was just going to draw again attention to the decoration and that's a really good opportunity for family to be involved. And kids too. If there's kids around, I always get them to come with me and to cut some of those sword ferns and then to decorate it. Or if they've brought flowers, then to come and do the flowers. And that can happen. You know, those people that are bringing that stuff could come early and do it. Or even there's always time, especially if it's a bigger gathering when people are mingling around and we can decorate the grave that way. So it's a good opportunity for family involvement and they feel a part of things and it's nice to make it beautiful instead of digging the grave. Okay, now these women are our local funeral directors. That's Christy Doyle with the white shirt and Hannah next to her. And then that's Hannah again. And then that taller person is Lindsay. And they are our local funeral directors on Salt Spring. And we're really lucky on Salt Spring to have them. And they aren't big corp. Christy owns the funeral home, and it's all women, and they all have kids. They've all met each other. Well, Christy and Hannah met each other because their kids go to school together, and their kids are friends. And I have teenagers, so we all have kids, and we have a good time. They're all really really fun women. And they're very practical, which is what I wanted to say. One of the reasons that I actually love funeral directors is the practical side. They can come and deal with the dead in a way that most of us can't. It's kind and compassionate, and it's matter of fact, right? And they do a lot more, I think, than people know behind the scenes. That you think, no, 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 I'll just take care. I mean, if you've taken a home funeral course, you understand there's some significant stuff to do with bodies, and especially if the person has died, you know, with a lot of illness or certainly are in an accident or anything. So I think in terms of cemeterians, if you're interested in starting a natural cemetery, or if you're pursuing that in your community, you finding a funeral director that is on board is one of the first steps to take, because they'll be a great advocate. Christy, she was one of the first people I went to when we were thinking about starting the cemetery, and I said, "What?" I didn't even know her, but I went and we had a meeting, and I said, "What do you think of this idea?" And she was like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so she kind of mentored me along the way, and she had me come into the funeral home and help with funerals and help in the office and get to know things a bit. So that was really invaluable. Now, the other side of that, though, is home funerals and the benefit. It's kind of like the digging the grave versus the machine in a way. It's like the funeral directors and the home funeral. So home funerals for sure, or being involved, even if it's at the funeral home yourself personally, can bring a more emotional aspect to it, which maybe you want. Whereas the funeral directors are compassionate, but they're very practical. So it can bring a more emotional side to the care of your loved one. And it can bring a more spiritual side. If you have spiritual practices, if you have religious practices, then you're definitely going to want to be involved. Now, these funeral directors as well will help with if someone wants to keep the deceased at home. Like, we buried someone last month, and he stayed at home until he came down here to the cemetery. So he stayed at home for 2.5 days, and the funeral directors went to the house and helped the spouse out with keeping him at home, and how to do that in a way that worked for everyone, for her. And then when it was time for the funeral, they went and they dressed him there with his partner and shrouded him, and then brought him directly down to the cemetery. So that's a really nice way to do it. And that might not always be an option depending where you live, but I think more and more that's becoming an option. Yeah, oh, I know. I was going to say it's kind of like home birth. I don't know about how many of you have had home births, but when I was a young adult, home births were actually illegal. And I assisted a friend with a home birth um, that didn't go very well, and she ended up in the hospital, and it was a bit nutty. But by the time everyone was okay, she was okay, the baby was okay. But by the time that I went to have babies, 10 years later than that, home birth was legal, and midwifery was legal. So I was really fortunate, and I had wonderful births with my midwives. So it's a bit like that. Like, I think right now we're getting getting the funeral directors on side. Like, we got the medical system on side with those of us that wanted to have home births. So we got to get the funeral directors on side with those of us that want to have home funerals. So that, I mean, you can do it yourself, like you can do a birth at home yourself, but maybe sometimes, and for some of us, to have a professional there is perfect, right? So that we have choice is the most important thing, I believe. Any questions about that? Okay.
Tamara was Madeline did answer her, but Tamara was just asking if a funeral director is required to transport a body in BC to the burial grounds, or can a family be approved to transport? And Maddie explained that you can get a form online, and yes, family can transport their own
Yeah.
anywhere within the province, I believe.
Pardon me?
Anywhere within the province, like from up here
Yeah.
down to the coast, or yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely get a burial permit. And yeah, even these funeral directors will help people get burial permits if they want to get burial permits. So that's pretty cool. One thing though that kind of is a glitch in the system is most hospitals won't release the deceased to family or friends. They'll only release to funeral directors. So you've got to, if you are clear about wanting to do it yourself and have a home funeral, you need to also die at home with an EDIS form, right? An expected death in the home form signed by a doctor. That's the way to make all of that happen smoothly. Yeah.
And the transport as well.
and then get the transportation certificate or whatever it's called. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is what we call the gathering place. And so now we're still walking through the ceremony, right? So we've dug the grave and we've decorated the grave. I've met with the families. We've made a little plan. We've got the grave prepared. We've decorated the grave, and then people begin to arrive. And this is an important time. I know it can be an awkward time at any social gathering that, sort of before things begin. And just like we did in this Zoom tonight, Nicola handled it really well. She got people talking and she asked questions and she used people's names. And that can be different. It can be different at a burial ceremony, at a funeral. It's a bit more somber. But still, this is a bit of the role that I play a bit, and the funeral directors play a bit, is speaking to people and saying welcome and introducing ourselves, and not overly so, but just gently, and reading the crowd and seeing if that's the right thing to do in the moment. But what is really important about this time is that people, again, like I said about the grief and the shock, even if it's a 95-year-old, people still are in shock, right? So letting people arrive, like taking this time for people to arrive and to get comfortable, to look around. Okay, this is where I am. This is the place. This is where the bathroom is. This is what's going to be happening, right? That's really important. That every step, I feel like that every step, there's like digestion, right? There's awareness in it. And then I was going to ask you, if you look at this photo, what you see, because this is a nice setup, I think. So, so anyone want to pitch in what you notice about this?
It's outdoors.
They're playing instruments?
Yeah. Yeah, music. Oh, so outdoors, that's the foundation that everything here is outdoors. I mean, rain or shine, 0 degrees or 30 degrees, it's all outdoors. And yeah, we've got musicians there, which is really, really nice. Music is wonderful at a funeral, at a burial ceremony. And here, this man's playing the guitar, and the woman next to him also does play the guitar and sings. And then on the other side of him on the table, he's got those singing bowls. He played those singing bowls, which is beautiful. We've had cellist here, we've had opera singer, we've had harp, we've had guitar, flute, drums, djembe drums. It feels like everything. Violin, fiddle, squeeze box, and then lots of canned music. We don't have power, but we have, with Bluetooth speakers, people bring music and play it on the Bluetooth speaker. So music, I definitely encourage music. And then if you look closer, to the right of this woman in the green, what you see is everyone looks very casual, standing, chatting, but in that basket there is the deceased. I don't know if I can zoom in, but whoops. So that is typical for how we do the, did I make those yellow lines?
No, someone's helping us.
So this is typical of how we do the ceremonies, is that we have the deceased right there in their basket. They're shrouded, and I think this person has also a sort of a sarong on top. And then behind the person is a nice wooden table, and there's like an altar on that table with photos and flowers and some candles often. So that's a typical setup. And then we also have the stumps and the benches in a round. There's a fire pit there. We don't have a fire at this point because it was a summer and the fire ban must have been on. Yeah, but I think what I love about this photo is that it just looks so normal, right? Looks so normal that the deceased is in the middle of all that. Yeah, as the people gather. And this is a little closer picture of that. This is a different funeral. And here we've got the candles in the fire pit. That's a nice alternative when there's a fire ban, is to put candles there. And that's the deceased in that basket. And then, like, you can see the table, like the altar in behind. And what I think what this also really shows is how, and this is how I live my life, is how this is so natural and it's so real in a way that there's the elements, there's the forest, there's a dead person right there in the middle of this circle. It's just kind of raw in a lot of ways, and it's so sacred, right? Again, it's the candles, it's the forest, it's the deceased. All of that is at once so simple and so real and so sacred. You don't have to do anything to make it anything. You don't have to, ring bells and burn incense. It's simply, I mean, there's a few pieces that enhance things, but it's simply this is beautiful and sacred, just like that. Sometimes when we try too hard to make things something, like to make something sacred, it makes people uncomfortable, right? It doesn't feel real. And I love that it's the realness of this that makes it special, yeah. Okay. One more picture here of the gathering place from the backside. And just to say again that anything goes and everything is welcome. Oh, I remember what happened here is the sun was so hot, everybody moved into the shade and we switched and put the altar on the far side there. So there's nothing that it has to be or that it should be. It's all welcome. Whatever words said are welcome. Say a few poems, maybe a song, maybe some words. There isn't it doesn't have to be any one thing. And what I've seen over and over, and I wasn't sure when we began, like I was a yoga teacher for years and I've been a part of a lot of different ceremonies. And I wondered about these ceremonies and what they would be like. And I didn't want to take charge and just do it. I wanted to empower people to do it. And that is what I've seen over these more than 3 years now, is that people do know how to do it. We remember, we know intuitively what it is to make ritual and what it is to make ceremony and to make meaning. And it doesn't take, like I said, it doesn't take a lot, but it does take some thought. It does take some feeling into it. What's going to be right for this person? What's going to be right for the group of people that are coming? What are people going to feel comfortable with? And yet what's going to, inspire and bring some emotion up, and yet hold it in a safe space? What's going to really honor the deceased? How can we do that well? And how can we honor nature? How can we do this process well? And so over and over, people have done it beautifully, just beautifully. It's usually, different. Almost every time is different. This woman standing in the green, she's led maybe 3 or maybe 4 of the ceremonies now. So she's got a nice rhythm with it, and we work really well together. But no matter who it's been, it's always been just amazing. And by amazing, I mean from like the person's, this is the spectrum from the person's friends, drinking a beer around the fire and having a smoke and saying, damn, he was a good guy, to the Catholic priest, to the djembe drums and everyone like chanting together, like the whole spectrum. Whatever it's been, it seems to me like it's just been perfect for it.
Cathy,
Mm-hmm.
I have a question from Tamara. And she asked, are there funerary artisans you work with, i.e., who is making the willow shroud base or coffins you are seeing?
Yeah, oh yeah, the willow, oh, sorry, the shrouds that we're using, there's a woman on the island here and she's sewing them, Sue Earl, and she's also a farmer. I've known her for years and she's a seamstress. So she's sewing them and she drops them off at the funeral home, and the funeral directors, they're in charge. They're doing that themselves. I just kind of got it going and now they're doing that. And then the willow tray there is woven from a man here on the island, Lionel Demondre. Um, the only trouble is he's not making a business of it. So he's not available for orders. I think there's a real opportunity for someone who's a willow weaver out there that could take it on. But I don't have time, but I would like to. I mean, I think it would be cool to do some workshops and everyone gets together and weaves their own, maybe you need a week-long workshop, but we all weave our own willow caskets. Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, so there isn't a,
I want to interrupt for a sec, Cathy.
Yeah.
Please, 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 please visit Cathy's website, Salt Spring Island Natural Cemetery. It is beautiful and there's all sorts of information there. And that question that was just asked, there's a whole page or a whole section about where their caskets and their shrouds come from. And it's just a wonderful wander. So I just encourage you to go and have a visit.
Thanks, Nicola. So this is just to show the fire, just because we do have a lot of fires and those other photos didn't have the fire. So it is nice to have the elements. Absolutely. And this is another circle just in another spot down below. And I wanted to say one word about circles versus rows. And I've learned this as well. Not everybody wants to be in a circle. If a lot of people are going to be very upset, rows can be better. Kind of pew style can be better because then people get a bit more privacy, right? If a lot of people are really breaking down, then that can feel more comfortable. Or if there's a rift in the family, maybe rows is better than a circle. So don't assume that everybody wants to have like a sharing circle and it's going to be all, warm and fuzzy. A lot of stuff comes up in funerals, right? It can be a beautiful opportunity for healing that, but also it can be challenging. So.
Someone was helping out and annotating with a couple of lines there, and I can't erase them. So I'm wondering if whoever was being helpful could pop into the eraser. Thank you. Sorry.
I think I'll probably play this twice because it's really beautiful. And it's hard to hear the audio, so maybe turn up your audio just for this because it's beautiful. It will get louder too. There it goes.
I can't hear anything yet, Cathy.
Starting. Did you hear it at the end?
No,
No. Oh,
but I see
shoot.
an accordion.
He's playing Hallelujah.
Ah,
It's
beautiful.
so beautiful. I
Ah,
don't know how you want to watch once more?
sure.
So this is a typical procession anyways. Sometimes we have a little golf cart, little sort of farm golf cart that we can take the deceased up the hill in. It's about 50-50. We use the cart versus the family and friends help.
I was going to ask, it looks like a bit of an uphill climb.
It is, yeah.
We've got a lot of seniors in the group, eh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not that seniors aren't spry,
Yeah, senior.
being one myself.
So you don't hear that at all?
No,
I think there's a setting, Kathy, that you have to go in and like share your computer or share video, audio or something.
Okay,
this is
another
also
time.
on your website, right?
No, not that. I don't think
Oh,
that. Oh,
okay.
it might be a part of one of the other things I've done.
Maybe I've seen it
Um,
on Facebook or.
Okay, now I'm just going to give you a trigger warning for the next slide that I'm going to show a casket and a basket and a shrouded body. Okay, so I think. There we go. So on the far left is a wooden casket, and the wood caskets are fine as long as they're made, without glues and metals. Basically, a couple screws would be okay. A few finishing nails would be okay, but basically it's all biodegradable. And then this willow basket in the middle is, I mean, they're kind of funny too because they're imported. It's all biodegradable, but it's not perfect. I mean, a locally made one is perfect for sure. And then on the far right, that's the locally made shroud and the willow tray that's also locally made. And we use the cemetery owns that tray, and we use it like in the video you saw to move people from A to B or from the gathering place up to the grave. And then we lift the deceased up with those straps that are curled up on the sides there. They're rolled up there. We lift them up and then we pull the tray out, we pull the sideboards out, and then we lower the deceased when it comes time for the interment. I'd really like to have a video showing that, which I don't, but I will endeavor to get that. But that's pretty intimate, and no one is. I haven't asked anyone that I have pictures or video of that if I could use it. But I think just the practicality of sharing that with people, you would understand. There's a bit of an art there as well, and that's also where the funeral directors actually really come in handy because Christy's quite assertive at that moment about how to lower them down. And no, you slow down. No, you lower a little more because you're just so worried about dropping someone. It would be quite terrible, right? So she's clear and she's a good leader at that point. And also the way this tray is set up gives us the pause. Once the procession gets to the graveside, it gives everyone a pause before, like I said, before the interment. So you can just absorb things and say more words and have the graveside service at that point. Okay. So these beautiful people, graveside, sharing a moment of silence. And like I said, it really varies what people do graveside. There are often some prayers or poems and words to express their love, but that's already been sort of said down at the grave. Down at the gathering place. Usually the graveside is more the goodbye. So it's quite sad. It's like I said at the beginning about this being a ceremony, just the steps of it are a profound ceremony. And this step is the person has been interred and you're saying goodbye. So you're maybe laying flowers on and you're saying, what you're giving to them to pass on. It's like we're giving them our wishes, and it doesn't matter about what you believe or don't believe about afterlife, but they're no longer here and they're gone. And so and it's for them or it's for us, it's for everyone, that it's important to be present to this and let them go. you know, and let them go with your love and with your blessings, even though it's the hardest thing and it's the last thing you want to do is that. But this is what we're called to do. This is what we must do when we're faced with a natural burial or with a burial at all. We must see them in the ground. We must let them go. So again, here they're honoring the deceased, and there we have the bagpipes player. She's great too. She's been out a few times. So just one more time to emphasize that you're bringing this person's life in a way to the space, and you're celebrating the things you loved about them, you do love about them, and then you're giving them to the earth. And in giving them to the earth, it's like a transitional time, right? You're letting them transition for them and for yourself. And you're letting them go in doing that. So you're doing it in a good way, saying, I love you, I celebrate you, you're beautiful, and you're coming back to the earth. And here is my blessing for you to be gone or to transition. And I am filling this grave in. I'm making you this nest. I'm putting you in the earth, and we're covering you up. And these people then are going to walk back down the hill and be in the land of the living, right? So on the left, we have a grave that's been filled with flowers and greenery that people brought. And then we will fill it later, or the families will fill it. Like I said, even just a little bit of soil, or sometimes the people just end up filling the whole grave. Can be quite cathartic. And then on the right side is a grave. It's about a week after the ceremony, and that grave in particular, and this happens fairly regularly, is the daughter. Oh, actually, this was the grave from that CBC. Did anyone listen to that CBC What on Earth podcast that was on? They played it. CBC played it recently. You can find it on the CBC show. It's called What on Earth with Lynch. What's her? Linda Lynch, or I forget her name. And it's called Bury Me Naked. It's quite good. It's about 20 minutes long. And the woman that they interview three different people, and then they interview me, and then they interview a woman that we decorated this grave together. And it was quite beautiful. So that's nice again for the family to be involved. They can come back, and we go elsewhere in the forest, and we find that moss and the plants, and we transplant them onto the grave. And then they're really tucked in, right? Then they've got a nice bed. Oh, this was a cremation burial, and I just threw it in here to show you about people filling it in. And the whole family took turns putting a bit of soil into that grave. And with a cremation burial, usually more time has passed than with it. Well, actually, always more time has passed than with a full burial. So the families are a little less, they're a little lighter. They're not in that acute grief. And so while it can still be very solemn and emotional and touching, it's a little bit less intense. And that really works for some people. That's just great if that's what people wish, and that is what they need. So the whole family helped to fill it in, and that's the widow, and she's a really fun person. And then we had the stone already carved because it was cremation, because we had the time to do that before the burial. So we put the stone right on place, and they brought all these stones, little pebbles that the dad had gathered from the beach, and that you can see there around the stone. And then you can see the family there. There's not an intense acute grief. There's also a sense of being together and happiness to be together and all of that. And then this is a picture of afterwards, after the people have walked back down, and they often have a toast. Even people that don't drink. Sometimes after a burial, a little drink isn't the worst thing. And I've noticed as well that a lot of the elder people that have passed on who we've buried, they often have the kids are like, oh yeah, mom loved to have a glass of sherry, or oh yeah, dad loved this scotch. So they'll bring that, maybe even like the exact bottle from the house, or they'll get it and then they'll bring that and maybe some glasses like this. These glasses were the woman's crystal glasses. So that's common and that's quite sweet. And then the other thing that people bring food. And sometimes people bring, especially if the people were artists, they might bring some of their art and then everyone can take a piece of their art. Or like these glasses were all distributed, take some of the family crystal because, not many of us really want our parents' crystal anymore. So pass it around. So it's nice to bring something fun in like that. And then people have a little memento of the person to take home. And now this is just to show you, this is second to last slide. So there'll be some time for questions. These are cedar plaques. So for scatterings, we do cremation scatterings here. And for cremation scatterings, people have the option to have a cedar plaque made. I mean, I get them made. It's just a man down the road that makes them. And so they're not permanent. They won't last forever. And a scattering kind of has that impermanent sense, right? So those have been quite sweet. I'm not sure how long the oldest one we have is just about less than 3 years. So we'll see how they last.
And can families, Cathy, have them replaced when they disintegrate?
I think, yeah, sure. I mean, we haven't talked about that, but yeah, I don't see why they couldn't do that for sure. Yeah. And then what we do is these are field stones and they're from the land. We have a lot of rocks on the land. And so we harvest them and we put them out near the parking area and people can choose a stone. And in fact, actually all of our graves have a stone and that's not optional. Gavin and I, when we were working on starting the cemetery, we liked the idea of headstones. And we felt that it's not a contradiction especially because the stones are from this land, that it's marking the graves seemed important for the families and we felt it, in our hearts and our spirits, we felt that that's what we wanted to offer for people. Um, and then what came out, right, was all the unmarked graves was that 2020 or 2019? So that just confirmed for us the choice that we had made to mark the graves, that was really important, and that there was a bit of kind of like a visceral reaction our society had to the sense of unmarked graves. And so all the graves are marked with these headstones. It's also the idea that these stones will be there basically forever. They're sandblasted, so it's carved in. We can keep all the records we keep, but there could be a fire and all the records here could be destroyed. There will be a collapse at some point of our technology, and we won't have our records in the cloud anymore. But these stones, they will always be there. So, when the archaeologists come in 2,000 years and look at our civilization, they'll see these stones and that this was a graveyard. So that's all the slides I have.
That's wonderful, Cathy. Thank you so much. There are some questions here from folks. Sherry was asking, do you find more females or males choosing natural burial?
There are more females. Yeah, there are more females. But I think there are more women. Okay, this generalization, yes. But I get more calls from women as well, and I think that is it's kind of the women's domain. It's like an extension of the domestic. It's an extension of the home, and the caring for the family is okay. Well, what are we going to do at the end of life? So there's that, but then there is also a lot of couples that come out, and the woman is very clear that this is what she wants, and the male spouse is like so. Um, and then though, then I tell them that with every full burial you can have one cremation burial in, because he's like, I'm kind of thinking about cremation, and you can have then they get 2 in 1 basically, and he's like, oh yeah, okay, that's it, I'm in. So as soon as there's a deal, and so that's great. She gets what she wants, he gets what he wants, everything's fine. And then they get a stone they can have both their names on the stone and stuff. So although, so that said, though, we have lots of men here, lots and lots of men, but it has been interesting to me to see that I think it's the caretaking, the caregiving.
Someone else was asking, do you have to follow provincial depth for body interment?
There are no provincial depths. There are no provincial rules about depth. So our graves are 3 feet about, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to read the cremation interment. I mean, interesting in a bureaucratic way, a legalese way, but to read the Cremation Interment and Funeral Services Act and regulations, it's a lot of it is about protecting the consumer and protecting people with the care fund and with the interment rights contract. But there's actually very little about the rules that you have to do in the earth. Very little. I mean, it has to be inspected by a geotech. It has to have the right zoning. The land has to be deemed this an appropriate use for it. But after that, the government doesn't really tell you all that much what to do. So people say, oh, is natural burial allowed where I live? It's not allowed anywhere. It's only a cemetery's bylaws that either say you can or can't do it.
Thank you. This has just been wonderful. I would just like to remind people, please, that those photographs are private, not to be shared. Certainly enjoy them on the recording as well, and do visit Cathy's website. I'll send out an email to folks who have registered here, and we'll pop in some information there in case you missed things tonight. And we're closing in on our time, but I want to check with everyone too about if you had any specific questions about natural burial in BC. If you came with a question that you haven't had answered, or something that's going on in the province that you're keen to share about, now would be a good time. Or specific questions for Cathy, of course.
Ask a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm about to start my practicum after closing to the end of my degree for environmental practice. And what I'm doing is a feasibility study for a green burial site in the Cumberland Community Forest. So I'll be partnering with the Cumberland Community Forest Society and others. I was just wondering what would be my first steps to take? What would you recommend? Like, is it like one after the other? Speak to the municipality, to the local First Nations, maybe read the legislation first. Like, what would be
Yes,
kind of
yes, and
the
yes.
recommendations? Yeah, all of the above.
Yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely. Cathy might be able to address that a little more specifically.
I mean, I think the number one go-to in BC is the Consumer Protection website, how to start establishing a place of interment. I don't know if everybody knows, but cemeteries and funeral services in most places in Canada and most provinces are overseen by the Consumer Protection Provincial Consumer Protection Group. So and so they enact the acts, and Yeah, yeah. I mean, and Robert, we can talk more. I think you maybe wrote to the Green Burial Society, did you? Yeah, I'm on the board of the Green Burial Society of Canada, and so I see those emails, some of them. So, I mean, you're welcome to talk. Why don't you give me a call, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
And if
Yeah,
consumer
awesome.
protection doesn't make you run screaming, you're on you're on track.
Yeah.
I haven't read
And
that
also
yet,
consumer
but I
protection,
will. I certainly will.
there are folks there who are quite easy to talk with too. Like it is a bit overwhelming to read the um read the rules and regulations, but there are people there you can reach out to and talk with, and they're actually pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And good for you. Good luck. Go, go, go.
I have a question. Cathy, are you open to a visit? Or how does that, if we wanted to see the space?
Yeah, the cemetery is open every day from 9 till 6 to the public. And if you want to meet with me, I'm happy to walk around and tour you around, and you just send me an email and we'll set up a date. And I encourage everyone if you want to connect with me, do it through the website contact page, not a direct email, because the direct email is very long and it often gets misspelled. So one thing I want everyone here to leave with tonight is the belief is that it's true that cemetery is spelled with 3 E's, no A. Okay, so that's the one takeaway. If nothing else, you know that cemetery is spelled with 3 E's.
Thank you. Anyone else have their hands up that I'm not seeing, or their eyebrows raised, or? Thanks, Robert. I'll put it in the email as well if people aren't comfortable grabbing it off the chat there. And we'll send the recording too. Marcel, you're unmute. There you go.
Yeah, if anybody wants to talk about any kind of anything about funeral, just share information, whatever. I put on the Facebook page called the Organic Funeral Conversation.
Marcel, I kind of know what you're talking about because you and I have chatted, but could you put that in the chat because we can't hear you most of it.
Okay.
Thanks. I know Marcel has a Facebook page. I believe he's inviting folks to join in and for just general discussions, specific discussions about green and natural burial. I'll also put that in the email that I send out, Marcel. Thank you. And Emily. Hi.
Hi there. I was curious, if or like, do we know if there's any kind of conservation burial in the works, potentially on Vancouver Island? I know we have some natural burial on the South Island, but yeah, curious about conservation burial specifically.
I think Cathy.
That's what Robert was talking about. He's trying to make it happen, but not yet. So Denman Island and Salt Spring are the only conservation burials in Canada.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, for you guys, and we need more.
Nothing on South Island in the works, I'm guessing.
I think the obstacle is cost, millions of dollars. I mean, yeah, the property costs.
As well, and that was kind of like part 2 to the question was like, how did it come to be on Salt Spring, and with regards to the land, and sort of like what was the cost of setting all of that up and things like that.
Well, that's like another hour and a half talk.
And maybe we'll do that if Cathy's willing.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah. Helen, you've got your hand up there. We need to unmute.
Okay. I would just like to thank you very much for letting me join this. I'm in Manitoba, so I don't have the privilege of having what you have to offer in BC, but I'd sure love to have it in Manitoba. And I'm sure many others would too.
Yes.
Do the same laws apply across Canada? Oh, okay.
No,
No, but Helen,
Right.
there is a group in Manitoba. I mean, there's Green Barrel Manitoba, and there's someone on the board. Well, actually, the president of the Green Barrel Society, Richard Rosen, is in Winnipeg, and Trish Penner is a woman in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, who's also working on establishing a Green Barrel,
Okay, hopefully I
a
live long enough.
conservation Green Barrel. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's
so
gonna.
very-
I think it's gonna happen. Trish is such a go-getter. I think it's gonna happen.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you all very, very much. Anybody else got a question, comment? Cathy, thank you again. It's just been just wonderful. Really enjoyed your presentation, and I so appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola.
One of these days I'll get down there in person and visit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and everyone's welcome to come and visit. I love it when people come.
we will do this again in 2 months, every 2 months. So I'll put the date out as soon as I figure it out. And yeah. I also have a Facebook group connected with Natural Burial in BC Facebook page that I will send a link to if anyone wants to get on there and chit chat paddywhack, sort of out of the general public eye. But if you have questions and maybe you're trying to put a cemetery together, that might be a good place to have a conversation. So I'll send that link out as well. Thank you all very much. Sherry's saying something. Unmute yourself if you want to say something, please. Don't feel like you have to be muted.
Thank you very much. This is brilliant. I'm excited. I want to book my time.
Good one. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Cathy and Nicola.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline, for your help.
Mhm.
Thanks, Robert.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
See you
have a
soon,
good-
Madeline.
Thanks.
you.
See you on Saturday.
Marcel, glad you could make it.
Always good to hear you. Bye-bye.
Nicola, do you want me to stick around for a second, or?
Yeah, would you for a sec?
Yep.
Thanks. I'm not sure.
Guess we could stop the recording.
Yes, please.
I'll let you do that, because